My son and I took a trip from where I live in Amman across the Jordan River and up to Jerusalem. So we're here in Jerusalem and we're renting a car from Good Luck Car Rental. This is where you want to rent a car if you're going into the West Bank. If you're going into the West Bank, this is Omar. He says he gives me the key. Where is the key to the car we're renting? He gives me the key. I say we're going into the West Bank, and he says, "Good luck with that." We have our rental car and we are heading out to the Palestinian town of Beitin. Oh, blocked off. So this way's blocked off. That doesn't really surprise me all that much. I know another way. We're gonna go try that. This is the second place that we've tried. It's also closed off. This is because the war in Gaza is going on and they've got these places in the West Bank, these Palestinian towns just shut down. I only know of one other way to try to get to, and if that's not open, then we just can't get to the site. The archaeological sites that I'm going to cover in this video are located about 12 miles north of Jerusalem. And they are very important biblical sites, and yet they are very unknown and people don't visit them. And the reason why is, as you go out to these areas, you'll come into the entrances of them and you'll see these big red signs that are saying that these areas are under the Palestinian Authority. That means that they are under the Palestinian police and military. And so it says that entrance to Israeli citizens is forbidden, it's dangerous to their lives, and that it's against Israeli law. The ones who would be really interested in Israel for Old Testament sites, of course, would be Israeli scholars and archaeologists. But because they can't legally access these sites, then from the biblical perspective, these sites have not been researched or excavated or understood or even visited for a very long time. And so I bring this up for a reason, so that we understand why sites like the ones I'm going to cover today were better known in the past, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were discovered, they were excavated, they were understood back then. But from that time until now, because of modern conflicts and because of these barriers and inaccessibility to the sites, then a lot of what was known in the past about them has to a large extent been forgotten. So we've come around towards Jericho and headed up into the area of Ai and Bethel. We're into the area. We haven't come across any barriers, so we're very relieved we're going to be able to do this project. We want to remember what they understood back in the early days, and we want to catch up so that we understand these sites better. And you really want to understand these sites because they are very, very significant sites in the Bible. This is one of the most amazing places on earth, and yet, amazingly, nobody comes here. I've never seen anybody visit this place, and it took me years to understand what this place was archaeologically. This is the ancient site of Bethel. So what really encourages us and supports us is if you're willing to hit that subscribe button. Also, I'll leave a link in the description where you can leave a donation if you're willing. They're so appreciated because they help us make future videos. Also, I'll leave a link in the description where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence. Thanks to all of you who have been leaving reviews and for making it #1 in archaeology. The information that I'm covering in this video is chapter 3 in my book, so it's a supplement to that chapter. So again, there'll be a link in the description where you can order a copy. This is Jerusalem in the 4th century AD. At this time, about 12 miles to the north stood a commemorative church. The impressive ruins of this church remain to this day. In the next segment, I'm standing here. So we're standing in the ruins of this massive church. You can see the walls to the church way over here. The apse of the church is in front of me here, and this is a much later medieval tower. And so the question is, what does this church commemorate from the Bible? I used to come by here and see these ruins when I was first exploring this area, and I didn't know what they were. And so the key to understanding this site is to understand the context around the site. And so we can use the ruins of this church as a compass because this is the apse of the church, which is pointing directly east towards the rising sun. So that means this is west, this is north, and this is south. There are two important Bronze Age fortified cities. One is directly to the west of this church ruin and very nearby, and the other one is east directly of these ruins. And so if we can understand what these two fortified Bronze Age cities are, west and east, then we can understand what event this church is commemorating. Moving towards the west, we see the church ruins on top of a ridge. Further to the west, across a valley, is the Palestinian town of Beitin, and underneath modern Beitin are the ancient ruins of the biblical city of Bethel. The location of ancient Bethel is known with certainty. There's actually a Palestinian town on top of it called Beitin, and Beitin preserves the more ancient name, Bethel. We have name preservation because Beitin and Bethel both mean house of God in two different languages. So we have that. And starting in 1934, the American archaeologist William Foxwell Albright began major excavations at Bethel. And he sums up his archaeological research in a statement in his excavation report where he wrote, "There could be no doubt of the correctness of the identification of Beitin with biblical Bethel." The reason he was so certain about this is because all of the occupations of Bethel that are in the Bible and also extra biblical sources, all of those many occupations line up exactly with the archaeological record of when that city was occupied. And so we have this match. And so it became absolutely known with certainty that this was Bethel. So I'm standing here in a field in the middle of Beitin, and I came here many years ago looking for the city, the ancient city of Bethel. And there were massive excavations here, and I saw the excavation report and all the pictures, but I came here again and again, and I could not find where these excavations had taken place. I didn't know it at the time, but what had happened was after they'd done the excavations, they were required to refill the squares that they had dug. And so because the people here, they need their fruit trees and everything like that. And that's why I couldn't find anything. Everything had been filled back in. In the published report of the excavations of Bethel is a picture of what is now known to be an Old Testament period olive press. And I found this olive press in the backyard of a house, and this actually was a huge clue for me to know that I was very warm. I was very close to where they had excavated starting in 1934. So the key source for me in understanding where the excavations had taken place in Beitin in the past were the locals. And have a few cups of coffee with the locals. The next thing I know, I'm being introduced to the older men in the village that were children when their fathers worked for Albright in 1934 during the excavations there. And they took me and they showed me the two-story building, which was the headquarters for that 1934 excavation. In the Bethel report is a top plan of the excavated areas that shows a two-story house and its courtyard, the corner of which is attached to another house. In the town of Beitin, these houses are still standing. This is the two-story house, the courtyard, which is also attached to this second house. In the next segment, I am standing here on the top plan, which in the town is here. This was the breakthrough, was this two-story house behind me with this courtyard that attaches to this other building. These buildings were here back in 1934 when they were doing the excavations of Bethel. In fact, this was the headquarters for those excavations. So by identifying something on the ground in the town of Beitin with the excavation report itself, then I could understand where the excavations themselves had taken place in relationship to that headquarters building. In the context of the houses on the top plan, these are the three major areas excavated beginning in 1934. In Beitin, since these are the houses on the top plan, then these are the areas that were excavated. In the next segment, I'm standing here. There was a key picture in the excavation report of Bethel that helped me understand exactly where they were excavating. It's a picture of the excavation being done right in this area and a man standing right where I'm standing. And then you see in the left-hand side of the frame the two-story house that was their headquarters. And this was the picture that let me know for certain that I am standing right now in the old excavation area of Bethel. This is the area of one of the main squares that was excavated. And all over the ground, there's pottery all over the ground. There's a rim of a storage jar. Here's a sling stone from a battle that took place here. And so we're talking about the archaeology is under our feet. It's already been excavated, but it's been filled back in. But there's no question about it. This is the ancient city of Bethel. So once I understood where ancient Bethel was located, where it had been excavated, then to find the biblical city of Ai is really easy, because the Bible describes, as we'll see in a minute, it describes these two cities close to each other and directly east and west of each other. So if this is Bethel, then all you have to do is go a little ways to the east and you'll come to the ancient mound, the tell of Ai. Therefore, on top of the ruins of Bethel is the town of Beitin, and on a high ridge to the east are the ruins of an early Christian church. Going further east, we come to the ancient mound of the ruins of the biblical city of Ai. So now that we know that the Bronze Age city that is just to the west of this church ruin is Bethel, and that the Bronze Age city that is just to the east of these church ruins is biblical Ai, now we can just use the Bible to understand what this site commemorates. The key verse is Genesis 12, verse 8, which says, "From there he," that is Abram, "went on toward the hills east of Bethel." That's where I'm standing right now, is on top of a hill east of Bethel, "and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord." This is the ancient campsite of Abraham, where he built an altar and called on the name of Yahweh. How can we know where Abraham pitched his tent thousands and thousands of years after he camped here? We know because the Bible gives us a description in between these two fortified Bronze Age cities. And since we know where these fortified Bronze Age cities are, and there's only one archaeological site in between them, which is closer to Bethel than it is to Ai, then it becomes obvious that what this site is commemorating is the ancient campsite of the patriarchs.
In Genesis chapter 13, we read of Abram. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had been earlier and where he'd first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, "Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you."
With the apse here pointing east, so that's west. He says, look to the north, look to the south, look to the east, look to the west. All of this land, Abram, that you see, I'm giving your offspring forever. Okay, we got to keep in mind that Abram is childless at this point. And yet the promise is that his offspring will be like the dust of the earth, unable to be counted. So as usual, one of the keys to understanding the ruins of this church are the early Christians. We have Eusebius around 320 to 324 AD, right in there, describing Bethel, which is still a village in the Byzantine period in his day, as well as Ai, which he describes as unoccupied ruin at his time. Then a little bit later in AD 380s, we have Jerome coming to this place, and these church ruins that you see here were a functioning church at that time. So Jerome visited himself this church.
Jerome wrote, "There also is a church built where Jacob slept as he passed through to Mesopotamia, whence also he gave it the name Bethel, that is, house of God." Putting all this together then, the Bible tells us that between the ancient cities of Ai and Bethel, on a hill east of Bethel, was the campsite of Abraham, which was also later used by his grandson Jacob. Because of this, the site was later commemorated by an early Christian church.
This is the place that Jacob had his dream and that Jacob called Bethel. So now that we know from the early Christians what this church commemorated, then we can understand this better. In Genesis chapter 28, we have Jacob who is traveling from Beersheba, and he's making his way up to Mesopotamia, up to Haran, Padam Aram.
Genesis chapter 28 says, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south."
And the interesting thing is that when we compare the details of what the Lord says to Jacob in this place, they're the same details, it's the same promise that earlier the Lord had spoken to Jacob's grandfather, Abraham.
So it doesn't specifically say that the campsite of Abraham is the same campsite that Jacob uses on his way back, but it makes sense because the campsite of Abraham is right to the east of the city of Bethel, and then the place where Jacob makes his camp is the place that Jacob calls Bethel. And so it's got the same name, it's in the same location, and so it makes sense that when Jacob is coming back up through that area, the specific place that he would stop for the night would be the old family campground that was used for generations. And so even though it's not specifically stated, it is, I believe, implied.
The Jacob account in Genesis chapter 28 continues. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven."
The thing that makes the place awesome isn't the way that it looks, it's that the Lord is there. And so if Jacob says, how awesome is this place, then his descendants, the Israelites, would also remember this awesome place because they are the fulfillment of the promise that Jacob and his grandfather are given at Bethel. They are the descendants of Abraham and Jacob who inherit the land of Canaan. And so the place would be remembered. The place would be passed down from generation to generation and then marked in the early Christian period.
Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. The Canaanites called this city Luz. Jacob called this holy place Bethel, that would later be marked with a church. Therefore the Israelites renamed the nearby city that had formerly been called Luz, Bethel.
Because of what happened here and because of Jacob naming this place Bethel, then the Canaanite city of Luz was called by the Israelites Bethel.
The promise made to Abraham and Jacob at Bethel was not only a blessing for the future nation of Israel, but also for the whole world.
Now listen to what he says. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. Now, this church that you're looking at here, the ruins of it, is archaeological evidence for the fulfillment of the promise that the Lord gave Jacob here.
By the time the builders made the church at Bethel, they were commemorating the fulfillment of that promise because the offspring of Jacob had come in the person of Jesus, the Messiah, who was the son of Abraham, the son of Jacob, who had blessed all people on earth. And now they were building a church to worship Jesus as Lord and Savior, as the blesser of all people. And so it is very fitting that the ruins that mark the site of Bethel are the ruins of a church.
My son and I didn't know it at the time, but the Israeli military was sporadically scrambling GPS signals because of the Gaza war, which is why, while flying at Bethel, our drone suddenly went completely out of control and crashed.
Oh, man. Oh. Oh. Yeah, it's totaled. So after Jacob's dream, he sets up a stone as a pillar and anoints it, and then he makes a vow to the Lord. He says, if you protect me on my journey and bring me safely back to this place, then you will be my God. And so when he's up in Haran, he has his family, then the Lord speaks to him and says to come back to this place, to come back to Bethel where he made his vow. And then he comes back to this spot in Genesis chapter 35. And again, God comes down, not in a dream, but face to face, he comes down and speaks to him in this place. And this is where God becomes the God of Jacob. This is where God speaks to him and says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but will be Israel, and changes his name to Israel. He is transformed when God becomes his God. And this is the case for all of us. There has to come a time where God becomes our personal God. It's not enough to serve the God of our parents. We have to make God ours, and we have to enter into that personal relationship with God. This is the place where that happened for Jacob. Before Genesis chapter 35, when he does that, then God is known as the God of Abraham and Isaac. After he comes back to this place and makes God his God, then God becomes known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Jesus said in John chapter 1, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man.
What he is saying, he's directly referring to the dream that Jacob had and what he saw at Bethel, and then he is applying it to himself. He is saying, I am the stairway to heaven. How do we get to heaven? We get to heaven through Jesus, who, just like for Jacob, came down out of heaven to do the work of salvation so that we could enter into a personal relationship with God, as Jacob did at Bethel, and not just call God God, but call God my God. One thing Jacob says is he says, how awesome is this place? I would agree with that. This is one of the most awesome places on earth. Think of all that happened in this place in the distant past, and its connection to all that will happen in the future. It's so encouraging to us and supportive if you're willing to hit that subscribe button. Also, we'll leave a link in the description where you can donate. We rely on donations because we tend to spend a lot more money on these videos than we bring in. So any donations are very appreciated and help for the production of future videos. Also, I'll leave a link in the description where you can order a copy of my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence. Keep in mind that the information we went through in this video is a supplement to chapter 3 in that book. Also, you might keep in mind with the holidays coming up that the book makes for a great gift to buy and give to others. And so you can order a copy of that book. You can watch another video here. We have a whole channel full of videos that you can watch. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.